Hello YouTube. This week I come to you from Newark, New Jersey. After last week being in St. Louis and then Corpus Christi and then back to Washington for a couple days for meetings, and now I'm in Newark, and then this weekend I'm going to go over to the New York Manhattan side to spend a few days with my grandma. I'm in Newark because it's the corporate headquarters of the company I work for, Beck Engineering. If you can even call it a corporate headquarters, it's a small little building. There's like 10 people that work there. Nonetheless, it's leadership that live and work here, and it's really been good to put faces with names and spend some time learning more about the company that I work for and their visions and goals and sort of the history, that kind of thing. And yeah, looking forward to seeing my grandma over in New York City for a couple days. We've got some Broadway show tickets, and I'm gonna try to go down and see. So don't judge me, but I'm really a huge Big Brother fan. And Christy Murphy, who was just on Big Brother, huge fan of hers. She has a boutique down in Staten Island, so I kind of want to go there just to like buy something and get a receipt because I'm that big of a Big Brother groupie. And so I'll have to add it to the photo that I got to take last year with another Big Brother contestant. But anyways, I digress. The true purpose of this video is to talk about a subject that has recently come up for me. As a lot of you may know from a previous video, I talked a little bit about how I'm working that ACA 12-step program. Currently in step 4 still. It seems, so step 4 is basically the series of what seems like endless inventories. But don't let that discourage you if you're thinking about working the steps. It's very hard. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of internal and external, just really breaking apart your life. It's very hard and emotionally taxing, but so far it's worth it because, you know, the phrase is so true. Like, to get over it, you got to go through it, basically. So the inventory that I just completed this last week is the sexual abuse inventory, which, don't get me wrong, no type of sexual abuse or sexual harassment is acceptable. But I will say, I've been pretty lucky in my life to not have anything terribly traumatic happen in that realm. But needless to say, I had some things to put down on my sexual abuse inventory. Absolutely none of it I'm going to talk about on this video. Totally not ready for that. But I do want to talk about a particular topic that came up for me while working this sexual abuse inventory, and that was about consent. So first of all, let me preface what I'm about to say by saying I realize that men and women can both be perpetrators, sexual abusers. So I may slip up and say he or him or gender-specific pronouns, but I don't mean it specifically at men. I'm just sort of conditioned, obviously, at 31 years old to say that, though. I feel like I'm pretty... I understand, you know, gender fluidity, and so apologize to all my men. I know that all men aren't dogs. I know all women aren't pigs either, so it's just force of habit. So consent. Let's talk about consent, people, because I feel like it is something that is not talked about enough. It's come up a lot in the recent years with the Me Too movement, but even I haven't really given it that much consideration until I worked this 4th-step sexual abuse inventory. So consent basically means that two parties agree to have some sort of encounter, for this instance a sexual encounter, some sort of sexual encounter. So in a perfect world where everything was black and white, that would mean, hey, would you like to do this thing? And the other person would say, yes, I give the consent. But, I mean, at least in the world where I live in, it hasn't worked that way. But I will say it should. So what I've realized in thinking back through some things is that I don't really think there's a such thing as an implied consent. So let me approach this from 2 separate avenues. So I feel like, and again, this is sort of the feminist in me coming out in me, and I feel a lot more empowered. I wish I could go back and tell my younger self a lot of these things I'm about to say, and if you're a young girl out there, I really hope that you take this to heart, but unfortunately I know that you have to learn from mistakes. But if I could scream these messages from the rooftop, I will. So from the woman's point of view, and from my point of view and my experience, sometimes you get in situations to where you didn't exactly want things to progress the way they did, and then they do. And then later you think, wow, you know, I kind of wish, or even in the moment, or even later you think, wow, I kind of really wish that it wouldn't have gone that far. I wish I would have said something. But I feel like women are so conditioned to not want to be viewed as a bitch, or or be called a tease, or be called, you know, any of these names. So women are, you know, there's been so many studies done where like a woman can say something and a man can say something, exact same thing, but the man is perceived to be as assertive and strong and a leader, whereas the woman is perceived to be a bitch, or, you know, any kind of other awful names that women are called. And, you know, I feel like women we're terrified of that. You know, we don't want to be that girl who, you know, who is bitchy and standoffish. And on top of that, like, you know, a lot of times women place their worth in how a man perceives them, or how the world perceives them. Like, we want to be wanted and we don't want to be rejected. So, you know, especially in my case, I feel like there's things that we do we wish we hadn't done because we don't want to be perceived a certain way, and because we don't want to feel rejected. Like, we feel like we need to do these things to be accepted by this other person. And so what I want to tell all the women out there and all the young women is, you are worth way more than basically how someone will perceive you, for standing up for yourself and for saying no, or I'm not comfortable with this. You are worth more. And if somebody was to reject you because you said no to a sexual act, then they are not worth your time. You don't need to associate with that person anyway. So dear younger self, dear younger girls out there, I just can't say it enough. You are worth more. Don't do things you're not comfortable with, and fuck whatever anybody else thinks about you, because the most important thing is how you feel about yourself and what you think about yourself. So that's sort of one side of it. On the other side of it, you know, I know that, you know, we'll call the perpetrator. Again, I'm trying to avoid saying like men and women. I feel like maybe there's this idea of implied consent, right? Like, oh, well, the girl didn't stop me, so maybe she, you know, I'm assuming that this is okay. But that's not. And of course, you know, to some extent, I feel like I did have the obligation to say no or stop, but again, it's sort of the societal perception that stops you. So I would just tell the men out there that it's not always easy and straightforward for a woman to say no or stop. It's uncomfortable. So if you're a good man out there and you care about your woman or your partner, or you're a good woman, you care about your partner, whichever way it may be, I highly encourage you to please stop, take the time and ask questions. Like, are you comfortable with this? Are you comfortable with that? And if they're not, and you really have, if it's more than just an encounter, then I encourage you to accept that and appreciate them even more for that, because it probably took a lot of courage. So, and of course, if they say no, that is like 100% like stop, do not proceed. Like, don't even think about progressing or asking or progressing after that. So that is my message to folks about getting consent, is make sure that you understand and have empathy for the other person. You know, make sure you are 100% sure that your encounter is going to be consensual. I think that there's a big gap in the way we talk about consent and understand consent in this country. We don't have any sort of like, you know, at least in my experience, high school sex ed was like a half a semester, and I can't even really remember, I can't even tell you what we talked about, but we definitely didn't talk about consent. And there was no uncomfortable conversations about what it means to say yes, and you know, it's why it's okay to say no, and that kind of thing. And I feel like by the time I think I was in 9th grade when we had our sex ed. I feel like by the time you're in 9th grade, like, it's kind of too late. I mean, you've already at least like probably kissed or something. That maybe not the case for everybody, but like the case is different for everybody. But I feel like 9th grade is probably a little bit too late. Then the question is how young is too young to have these conversations about, you know, sexual relationships and consent and consequences. There's definitely an age where it's too young and you can probably traumatize a kid. So seriously would be very concerned or very interested in hearing back from anybody who watched this video about your thoughts on maybe how do we educate children better about consent and sexual education. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it doesn't have to be that way. We can change society. You know, we don't have to, you know, I was watching a TV show the other day about pornography. It's an epidemic because that's where people go to like learn about sex. Like maybe if we had more open and honest conversations about sex, like, you know, the world would just be a different place. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that. And I would love to hear maybe like some people like maybe give a pledge that you'll say, you know, that you'll always, you know, ask for consent, and maybe some girl power out there saying, you know, heck yeah, I'm gonna like, you know, I'm worth more than, you know, what someone else might think about me. So seriously, really looking for some feedback on this one. And maybe if you don't agree with me, that'd be also an interesting point of discussion as well. So there you go. Happy Thursday, everybody. Have a great weekend.